Hey, so just go get straight to the point with this one. Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister, well, he needs no introduction. Tony Blair has been quite vocal in recent weeks and months about Brexit and his staunch conviction that we should be questioning the process at the very least. He's quite skeptical of the way May is handling it. And you don't need to read between the lines to see that Blair is a strong Remainer and believes we would be better if we stay in the European Union. Now, I want to address a very specific point with this, and this is going to be a very brief video. I'm just going to outline how I feel about this. There's a question that a lot of people are asking, and it is people who are predictable Blair haters. And they're saying, why should Tony Blair have an opinion? Why should this warmonger be allowed an opinion? Well, firstly, that line's getting a little bit tiresome now. Um, Tony Blair's never been put on trial for war crimes. That's just a fact of record. Um, I get it. Tony Blair is a very divisive figure. 10 years after his premiership, he, divides opinion very deeply, much the way that Margaret Thatcher does. But whether you like them or loathe them, both Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair were hugely important political figures. Tony Blair is a political giant. Whether you love him, loathe him, or, well, I don't think anyone's indifferent actually to Tony Blair. There are people who can understand both sides. Um, but this isn't a video about Tony Blair's legacy. This is about that basic fundamental question: why should he have a say? I would respond quite simply: someone who served their country as Prime Minister for 10 years, won 3 general elections, I would say their opinion has some weight. I would say this of any former Premier, but especially someone who was so electorally successful. He is second only to Margaret Thatcher in modern times as the longest serving Premier. He's the longest serving Labour Premier, although Harold Wilson and Clement Attlee were leader of their parties for longer, of their party for longer. But those are the facts. Tony Blair served more years as Prime Minister than any other Labour leader. So I get that hardcore Corbynites hate Blair as much as, probably even more than the Tories do. Um, but it's a nonsense thing to say because I don't like him, he's not allowed an opinion. There's certain public figures I deeply dislike, but I can recognize that the position that they're in, they would warrant a say on this most important of issues. So the issue here is not whether you agree or disagree with what Tony Blair is arguing here. It's a basic principle that he is a former premier. He was in the most powerful position in this country for a decade. He is a hugely significant political figure. I don't agree with those who say he's irrelevant. If Jeremy Corbyn becomes Prime Minister, then I grant you Blairism and that third way project will become less relevant. But until Jeremy Corbyn and his brand of Labour can show that it can get elected to national government, then it is still really a project. Um, and it's bringing Labour back to really its pure socialist roots. But I think that every Labour Prime Minister realised that they had to reach out. Even figures who were more left wing than Blair realised they had to reach out to the centre ground. No Labour leader who was as left wing as Jeremy Corbyn has ever become Prime Minister, and that's not hating Corbyn. It's just stating a fact. Anyway, I'm going to round this up. But that's why Tony Blair's opinion matters. Because he was Prime Minister of this country for 10 years. He won 3 general elections, including, by the way, 2005, which was after the invasion of Iraq. He won those elections democratically. He was elected by the British people. And all I will say as a closing point here, I follow Tony Blair's page on Facebook, at least his forum. I think it's called the Tony Blair Faith Initiative or something like that. I forget the exact title, but every time I look at it, there's Blair haters there, and I'm thinking they've a right to their opinion. Okay, I've always defended people's right to criticize the powerful, but I don't want really understand why they spend so much time there. The thing about war criminal, traitor, etc. When you push these people, their arguments actually start to fall flat. So they say war criminal. Well, the fact of the matter is, and I didn't intend to make this a big lengthy video about Blair's legacy, but the fact is, firstly, he's never been tried as a war criminal. Now, you could say that's because of bias towards Western countries, or you could consider the fact that Saddam Hussein did violate UN sanctions over and over and over again. Um, those are the facts. This was a genocidal dictator, and whatever you think of the Iraq War, I'm starting to believe that I must admit my views on the Iraq War have changed. I still believe it was very reckless. I still believe Bush and Blair didn't think anywhere near enough about the post-war situation, and that was one of the gravest errors of the invasion. And morally, there is definitely a side to it that you can't condone. Civilians did die, but looking at what happened with Arab Spring, almost certainly, well, at least it's very likely that the Iraqi people would have risen up against their dictator as the Syrian people did. And Iraq would have ended up in a state of instability anyway. Now, I know people will say that's really speculation, and I grant you it is. But it's hard to believe that with everything that was going on with Arab Spring, the Iraqi people would have been any different and just been okay with what their dictator was doing. And I get quite angry when I see what the hard left does when they try to pretend that Iraq without intervention would have been some sort of utopia. Iraq under Saddam was a brutal place. These are the facts. It may not have been in a state of war, but you cannot definitively say war would never have happened. Um, but anyway, I'll leave it there. I'm not telling people, I'm not suggesting people need to like Blair. He is a controversial figure, and there's a lot of areas I am not entirely comfortable with Blair's legacy either. But I still think this is a man whose opinion matters, and I still believe that he is a well above average prime minister. I believe Tony Blair is a great man. I'll say that. And the thing is, because of the way people get into this lazy populism, like, oh, he's a war criminal, he's a traitor. Um, when you push it, I'm okay with people who can really explain why they hate Blair, but a lot of people seem to just join the bandwagon, and that irritates me because it's a lazy sort of assessment. You can't dismiss any leader, especially in democratic countries, as entirely good or entirely bad. I'm not a Tory, but I give Margaret Thatcher lots of credit. I also recognise a lot of the pain and damage she caused, particularly in parts of the country like where I live, in North East England. So I think when you assess any leader, you have to look at the whole picture. When it comes to Tony Blair, too many people are frankly lazy. They don't want to look at the whole picture. They don't want to look at it in a fair way. And that does irritate me. Sweeping statements always irritate me. So when I see people saying, oh, Blair made a mess of the country, okay, you may be dead set against some of his policies that you would argue did make a mess of the country, but at least give him credit. 10 years, you can't dismiss as entirely bad. You just can't. Um, it's like, it's like Thatcher in that sense. So, yes, Tony Blair deserves a say on Brexit. And I, for one, am interested in what he has to say.